Welcome to Archive Vault, where we explore declassified records, hidden histories, and state-level investigations. Please note, some illustrative narration is AI-generated for storytelling purposes. All content is educational and documentary-based. It begins without warning. No explosion, no visible threat, no announcement, just a sound, or sometimes pressure, a sensation described as intense, focused, impossible to locate. In late 2016, U.S. diplomats stationed in Havana began reporting something unusual. They were experienced professionals, trained observers, not prone to panic. What they described was consistent in one way. Their lives divided cleanly into before and after. Some were in their homes, some in hotel rooms, some simply walking. They felt sudden pain, disorientation, nausea. Then came the lingering effects, headaches that did not resolve, difficulty concentrating, memory gaps, sleep disruption. Symptoms usually associated with traumatic brain injury, without any impact. Medical examinations followed, neurological tests, specialists. Nothing obvious appeared, and that absence became part of the story. As reports increased, officials faced a problem. There was no visible weapon, no clear exposure, no single location to shut down. Yet the complaints followed a pattern, not random, not widespread, targeted. Embassies in Havana, then elsewhere. China, Europe, Washington. The same descriptions, the same confusion. Some cases were dismissed as stress, others taken seriously. This inconsistency mattered, because when symptoms cannot be measured cleanly, belief becomes a variable. Those affected described something else, a sense of being watched, not visually, but neurologically, as if the mind itself had been intruded upon. Doctors debated causes, environmental factors, acoustic phenomena, psychological stress. Each explanation solved part of the puzzle and left the rest untouched. What made this case unsettling was not uncertainty, it was restraint. Governments spoke carefully, language softened. Unexplained health incidents, anomalous events. No definitive statements, no public attribution, just quiet relocations, early retirements, medical leaves, careers interrupted without a clear reason to point to. Those affected found themselves in a difficult position. Their symptoms were real, their proof was incomplete. To speak publicly risked being doubted. To remain silent risked being forgotten. Years later, investigations continued. Reports contradicted one another. Some dismissed the phenomenon. Others reaffirmed injury. No single narrative held, and that too became part of the pattern. Because when harm is subtle, when causation is unclear, systems default to ambiguity. Ambiguity protects institutions, it does not protect people. Havana Syndrome is not frightening because of what it might be. It is frightening because of what it demonstrates. That a person can be impaired without a visible attack. That disruption can occur without acknowledgement. That damage does not require spectacle. And that when the mind is the site of injury, certainty is the first thing to disappear. This episode is not about assigning blame. It is about sitting with a question that has not been resolved. What does it mean when people serving quietly begin to break, and no one can say why? And how many cases does it take before uncertainty itself becomes a policy? Once the reports reached Washington, the problem changed. It was no longer medical, it was procedural. Agencies began doing what they are designed to do when something does not fit an existing category. They subdivided it. Medical teams examined symptoms. Intelligence agencies assessed intent. Security teams reviewed locations. Each group asked a different question, and because the questions were different, the answers never aligned. Doctors documented balance problems. Cognitive testing showed decline. Some brain scans revealed subtle abnormalities. Not dramatic enough to be decisive, not clean enough to be dismissed, enough to complicate denial. Next came cause. Investigators examined environmental factors, insects, chemicals, structural vibrations, then acoustics, sound waves, ultrasound, infrasound. Some theories explain the noise. Others explain the nausea. None explained all of it. The most troubling detail remained consistent. The sensation was directional. Victims described it as coming from a specific angle, a specific location. When they moved, it stopped. That detail could not be ignored. Intelligence agencies began reviewing foreign capabilities. Microwave technology entered the discussion, not as a conclusion, as a possibility. Microwaves do not leave residue. They do not create sound in the air, but under certain conditions they can create sound inside the head. This phenomenon was documented decades earlier. Known, studied, archived. That knowledge complicated things, because acknowledging feasibility forced a more dangerous question. If it could be done, who would benefit? And if someone benefited, what response was appropriate? This is where the investigation slowed. Public attribution carries consequences, diplomatic, strategic, irreversible, and without absolute certainty, certainty became the standard. Reports were commissioned. Some concluded the incidents were likely environmental. Others stated the injuries were real and inconsistent with stress alone. One report contradicted another, not because the data changed, but because interpretation did. That divergence mattered, because once official assessments conflict, policy defaults to caution. Caution looks like delay. Delay looks like silence. Meanwhile, the affected individuals waited. Some were reassigned, some placed on medical leave, some retired early. Treatment focused on symptom management, not cause. Headaches, vertigo, cognitive fatigue. There was no protocol for recovery from an injury without an acknowledged mechanism. Families noticed changes, memory lapses, personality shifts, reduced tolerance for stimulation. These were not dramatic declines, they were subtle, which made them easier to doubt and harder to live with. As time passed, a new problem emerged: narrative drift. Media coverage framed the story differently each year. At first it was a mystery, then a controversy, then a debate. Eventually it became background noise. For those affected, that shift was decisive. Because once a story becomes abstract, the people inside it disappear. Investigators continued working. Quietly, classified assessments were written, capabilities evaluated, threat models updated, but no unified explanation was released that closed the case, and so the investigation entered its final phase. Not resolution, but management. Language softened further. Anomalous health incidents, a phrase designed to hold uncertainty without admitting ignorance. That phrase did its job. It allowed operations to continue, relationships to remain intact, tensions to stay contained. But it did not answer the question that lingered beneath everything else. If this was an attack, why was it invisible? If it was not, why were the injuries consistent? And if no one could say for sure, what did that mean for the people already affected? The investigation did not end. It simply stopped moving forward in public. And when investigations retreat from view, they leave something behind. Not clarity, but doubt. The aftermath, after the investigation slowed, life did not return to normal. For the people affected, there was no clear moment where the danger ended, only a moment where attention moved elsewhere. That distinction mattered. Medical care continued, but it changed in tone. Urgent testing became long-term management. Specialists focused on coping, not cause. Headaches were treated, balance issues monitored, cognitive strain accommodated. But there was no diagnosis that carried certainty. And without certainty, something subtle happened. Responsibility blurred. Agencies could not confirm exposure. Doctors could not promise recovery. Supervisors could not explain timelines. Each part of the system functioned correctly. Together they produced limbo. Many of those affected described the same experience. They looked fine. There were no casts, no visible scars, no obvious impairment, which meant they were often treated as if they should be better by now. That expectation carried weight. Colleagues assumed recovery, managers assumed improvement, friends assumed exaggeration had passed, but symptoms persisted. Difficulty focusing for long periods, sensitivity to sound and light, a constant cognitive fatigue that did not announce itself. The kind of injury that forces you to choose between pushing through and breaking down later. Some tried to return to work. They struggled with tasks that once felt automatic. Names slipped, details blurred, stress tolerance dropped sharply. Not enough to fail dramatically, enough to fail quietly. Performance reviews changed tone. Opportunities stalled. Assignments narrowed, not as punishment, as precaution. Careers built over decades slowed without explanation. Others accepted early retirement, not because they wanted to leave, but because staying required proving something they could not prove. That the injury was real, that it mattered, that it was not psychological. Families felt the shift first: irritability, withdrawal, sleep disruption. The person was still there, but not fully available. This created another problem. How do you grieve a change when no one acknowledges it happened? Some sought validation publicly. They spoke to journalists, shared medical records. That came with a cost. Public doubt is not neutral. Once a story becomes controversial, the individual inside it becomes debatable. Some were described as anxious, others as stressed, a few as suggestible. None of those words are insults, but together they reshape credibility. And credibility determines who is believed when evidence is incomplete. Over time, the term Havana Syndrome itself became unstable. To some, it meant attack. To others, misinterpretation. To others, mass psychology. That instability did something important. It shifted the focus away from the people. The debate became abstract. Weapon or no weapon, foreign actor or not, sound or microwave. While that debate continued, lives remained interrupted. No formal closure was offered. No final determination that restored confidence. No acknowledgement that uncertainty itself was damaging. The system did what systems do when clarity is unreachable. It normalized the ambiguity. For those affected, this was the final injury. Not the initial event, but the realization that their experience would never be cleanly resolved. That they would carry symptoms without a narrative that made sense to others. That their service would end without a clear explanation of why. This is the quiet outcome of unresolved cases. Not outrage, not scandal, but erosion of trust, of identity, of certainty. And once erosion sets in, it doesn't announce itself. It just continues, long after the story stops being told. Havana Syndrome does not end with a revelation. There is no final document, no press conference that resolves the question, no moment where uncertainty collapses into truth. Instead, it ends the way many modern cases end, by becoming livable. Investigations remain open in name. Policies adjust quietly. Training materials change language. Precautions are added. Exposure protocols rewritten, risk acknowledged, without being defined. This is how systems move forward without admitting they were moved. For the people affected, the story settles differently. They learn which environments exhaust them, which sounds trigger symptoms, which conversations are worth avoiding. They adapt, not because they have answers, but because life demands continuity. What remains unresolved does not disappear. It changes shape. It becomes a footnote in briefings, a paragraph in reports, a caveat in planning, and over time, the absence of certainty becomes policy itself. Because ambiguity has a function. It prevents escalation, it protects relationships, it avoids commitments that cannot be reversed. Ambiguity is not failure. It is a choice, and it comes with a cost. When harm cannot be named, it cannot be fully addressed. When cause cannot be confirmed, responsibility cannot be assigned. And when responsibility dissolves, the burden shifts onto the individual. Havana Syndrome leaves behind a question that has nothing to do with technology or adversaries. It asks what happens when service produces injury that does not fit existing categories, when the body records something the system cannot explain, when certainty is demanded, but impossible. This episode is not about what caused these incidents. It is about what follows when something happens that no one can comfortably define. Because in those moments, institutions do not collapse. They adapt. And people do too, quietly, imperfectly, without closure. That is the true legacy of unresolved events. Not fear, not panic, but a new normal built around unanswered questions. And once that normal sets in, it rarely reverses. Thank you for listening to Archive Vault Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive and found it insightful. Wishing you a great week ahead, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. We'll be back soon with more stories from the archives. See you next time.